Welcome to another riveting edition of Risk and Return. I'm Charlie Gasparino from Fox Business and the New York Post. I'm with my partner, the granddaddy of data, Bob Sloan of S3 Partners, the ultimate source of data. And as you know, if you watch the show, you know he never misses a beat. Bob, why don't you bring in our guest?
Today, we have a very special guest. Gillian Tett has written 4 books: Anthrovision, Silo Effect, Fool's Gold, and Saving the Sun. She is a OBE. She is the head of King's College at Cambridge, and she's held practically every single post there is to hold at the Financial Times. Gillian, welcome to our show. It is such a great honor and privilege to have you here.
It's great to be on the show, and saying I've held all those posts at the FT makes me sound seriously old. But anyway, great to be with you guys.
No,
We should point out.
Or
She's still
mature. Mature is now the official word these days,
right. And by the way,
So
it's
I'm
not.
feeling super mature.
And let's make sure she's still there. You're there as a columnist, so
Oh yeah, I'm still at the
um,
FT as a columnist. I'm still a member of the editorial board, but I'm also overseeing King's College in Cambridge in the UK. So I split my life between the US and UK.
oh, lucky you.
Well, what do you think happened today? We have a very contentious battle between the administration and the current Fed chair. Comes out, there's 2 dissenting votes, comes out, keeps interest rates steady, and says remarkably, the economy is in great shape. Jillian, what's your read on Federal Reserve politics and where do we go from here?
Well, as we have with President Trump, we always have a reality TV show, or if you want to be Japanese, a kabuki play. And right now, Chairman Powell is the favored piñata, the thing that everyone loves to bash. And he's playing a very useful role for President Trump because if anything goes wrong with the economy in the rest of the year, and that's quite likely we're going to see a slowdown, it's going to be blamed on Chairman Powell because he and the rest of the board have not yet cut rates. There's obviously a big backstory going on around who is going to try and replace Chairman Powell. The fact that Chris Waller was one of the 2 Fed governors who actually did vote for a rate cut today is all part of this game about them trying to, if you like, suck up and impress President Trump. But the reality is that the more that President Trump attacks Chairman Powell, the more that the Fed is determined to demonstrate its independence, and the more the question of whether we're talking about short-term or long-term rates really matters. Because President Trump seems to only focus on short-term rates, which is what the Fed can actually directly raise or cut. But of course, what matters to most US mortgage holders and other borrowers are 10-year rates, and that reflects investor sentiment. And the more that the Fed is attacked, the more that investors get nervous, and the greater the risk, the 10-year rate goes up.
Jillian, I wonder if by Powell touting the economy today, he's setting the stage for not raising rates in the next meeting. If he's just going to stick it to Trump, I don't know if
You
he's
mean not cutting? You mean not cutting rates in the
they're
next
not cutting
meeting?
rents. Yes, if he's just going
Yeah.
to keep it because the general impression of Powell is that he doesn't have a lot of let's just say intestinal fortitude. He's bowed. He's cowered to political pressure in the past, particularly from Trump back during Trump one. But does he want to be going out as a lackey, a political lackey? So I wonder if he's just going to keep it steady and let Trump freak in the
Well,
next.
I think several things. Point one, Chairman Powell knows perfectly well he's being set up as the piñata that President Trump's going to keep bashing. Point two is that unlike Trump's first term, at this point, Chairman Powell has nothing to lose.
Yeah,
His term is coming to an end. He was appointed without having a PhD in economics or a fancy professorship. He's always felt a bit insecure about that and has always tried to almost compensate by being doubly keen to go by the book. And right now, he is absolutely consumed by this idea that his mission on planet Earth is to defend the Fed independence and defend his legacy through that stance. And so I will be extremely surprised if he goes willingly. Remember, it's not just him who sets rates, it's the entire board. I'll be very surprised if the board buckles quickly. And the bottom line is anybody who's done a 101 economics class knows that if the economy is strengthening, as President Trump himself celebrated this morning, and if we're facing more inflation risks further down the tracks, the reality is that is not the right environment to be cutting rates in.
Although you said yourself, it's the economy could be slowing. I mean, listen, we're in a really crazy period right now. We don't know if you just add up all the pluses and minuses. You don't know where the pluses, the stimulative pluses of the big beautiful budget, which there are, particularly in various there's an extension of the tax cuts, and there's business taxes, that the business depreciation, or stuff that's a little bit above my head, but I know it's stimulative. It's in that bill. That's a push. The tariffs, even at 15% or whatever they are in China, that's a pull. We don't know where one begins, the other ends, and so it's impossible to really map out. Is this stimulative? Will we have inflation? Will we have a slowdown? So Powell, in many ways, is in really precarious position. He could be blamed if we have inflation. He could be blamed if we have a slowdown.
But I mean,
He,
101 central banking is that if things are totally uncertain, you need to wait and see until you get more clarity. And it's not just the fact that the big, beautiful bill has all these contradictory aspects of it, which are both going to boost growth and reduce growth. The other big issue right now is a time lag effect because we just don't know the degree to which companies are essentially living off borrowed time right now by having stockpiled massively goods that could be subject to tariffs. And that might be why we haven't yet seen inflation. When the stockpiles run down, they may eventually start hiking. We just hiking prices. We just don't know. And the other issue we just don't know about is Trump psychology, because investors have been betting on the phenomenon known as TACO, Trump always chickens out. That was christened by a FT colleague of mine. And essentially, people assuming that Trump will always roll back his rhetoric and cut deals with other countries. But who knows? Maybe he won't.
Well, he did. He only chickened out on trade. He didn't chicken out on everything else. He's done everything else, and trade he chickened out on because people stopped buying our debt for a couple of days there, which is kind of a scary situation because
yeah, but
the 10-year
that's
deal
a
about.
Yeah, and also that he chickened out with China because China started squeezing him on the rare earth minerals and the magnets.
Right.
And so it's like, never mind a three-dimensional Rubik's cube. This is like a seven-dimensional Rubik's cube where you're trying to
right.
fiddle all the pieces together and work out where the economic impacts are.
But
Why
what would
doesn't
hurt? What would hurt?
Powell? Hold on, Charlie. Hold on 1 second. Why doesn't Powell say and float a balloon and says, "I'm going to resign"? What do you think the markets would do if he resigned?
I think the markets would freak
That's what I think.
because, yeah, I mean, I mean, Bobby, you've been watching this for years. At the moment, there is the situation is this. Treasury Secretary Bessent has to sell $9 trillion worth of bonds over the next 12 months, just the next 12 months. That was always going to be tough. He's doing it into a world where there are inflation concerns, where the dollar's fallen by about 10% in value since the start of the year, where the debt is ballooning, and
Yeah.
where essentially people are undermining the independence of the Fed. Those are horrible combination of things to be selling debt into. The fact the bond market hasn't freaked out is primarily due to the fact that Treasury Secretary Bessent's been doing a phenomenal job of pulling every single trick out of his bag to keep the bond market calm in ways that voters don't understand and most investors don't understand the games that they're playing behind the scenes. But if you were to see suddenly Chairman Powell resign or be pushed out, that would really, I suspect, freak out investors. What do you think,
Well,
Bob?
let me
Yeah,
just say
I
this.
I, I think that.
Bob,
Oh,
let me
oh,
make this point. The rolling over of the short-term debt, which is what Powell is, excuse me, what Bessent's doing, which is like what Yellen's doing. So to not disrupt the 10-year, that does necessitate lower interest rates, or else our budget deficit will gap out. And if the budget deficit does gap out, that could be a problem for the market. So don't we really need a rate cut so we can book those savings without
But why do you need a
much.
rate cut when every time the 10-year gets something near 5%, there's a massive bid? It
Yeah, no, I know.
bounces,
I
right? The
know.
world's awash in liquidity. So as long as the world is awash in liquidity and people have to come here, um, it still works.
No, but
The,
you need the rate cut to basically make the numbers work. I mean, here's their plan right now. I mean, this is just it. I'm not saying I agree with it. They're before they cut taxes in the big beautiful budget, which is not so which is really big but not so beautiful, right? We know they cut taxes. Part to keep the budget deficit within that 2.1 trillion dollar range, right? Wherever it is, you literally need to book immediately the tariffs that they're coming in, which they're doing, even though in the future, who knows how that's going to impact economic growth. But you're booking that now and you're hoping for economic growth in the future of 3% that it holds. So you keep getting tax revenues. But to make the numbers work, you need to keep rolling over short term debt. And if they don't get the tax cuts, the rate cuts that they need, well, rolling over short term debt becomes more expensive. And I think that's part of the calculus here. So I'm wondering if it's better for the budget and for the markets if he just cut rates and so we can book the savings.
Well,
well,
the
but
reality is, of course, it would be good for the short-term issuance of short-term debt
Right.
in the very short term. But first of all, you don't want to mortgage a house with overnight credit or a credit card debt. I mean, that just means you have to keep rolling over, and you're basically very vulnerable to interest rates going up again in the future. Because if they roll over lots of short-term debt now, and in a year's time the rate's gone up dramatically, they'll be screwed. Secondly, if you start issuing lots of short-term debt and cut short-term rates, investors quite rightly are going to say, this looks a bit like a house of cards. I'm worried about inflation exploding in the future, and the long term is just going to go up. And again, that's going to hurt them as well. So I think this strategy is potentially, at best, very risky.
It's
well, you
risky.
have the duration risk is a real thing, and that's what both of you are saying, and that the return of some kind of premium for the different maturities, it's a real risk, right? If that breaks down and all of a sudden 10 years at 6%, that's a whole new world. So SVB, Silicon Valley Bank was maybe a canary in the coal mine. It was a interesting maybe predecessor to what's happening writ larger with the US government. So I personally think that the dollar dominance, the waning of the dollar talk is overdone. It's the flows are there and the money is there buying longer term 10-year and other assets. So, there is a narrative that says, the dollar is being replaced. It's not the reserve currency that it once was, et cetera, et cetera. There's room for, baskets of currencies and or other
Crypto.
countries' currency to be buy oil and all that. But as it stands today, and if you're Treasury Secretary Besson and you look at the world, you say, okay, um, are people buying what we're selling? The answer is yes. But those always for how long? And I've always asked myself, why didn't we issue 50-year debt when rates were zero? Where was the responsible? I think, no
They
one
tried.
asked
They
that
tried
question.
that, Bob. That was for Trump won. They were. I think it was Steve Moore, one of his economic advisors, that pitched that, and it got shot down. And Besson recently shot it down again. By the way,
They didn't
So
try very hard, and I'm totally with Bob
I
on this
think
one, by the way. Argentina did it, plenty of countries did it, and it's not very good for the investors that bought it, but sure as hell is good for the countries that actually issued it. And the
exactly.
fact they didn't do it is kind of bonkers,
is
to use
Argentina
a
a good?
to use a technical British term.
Is Argentina a good example though? I mean,
No,
Argentina
but right now it
now
may
it would
be.
be
And listen, we just had a
maybe.
government that created a bill called the Big Beautiful Bill, Triple B, and no one in the government seems to notice, no one in the White House noticed that Triple B is a tag you give to bonds before they become junk. I mean,
Yes.
hello, are we saying that America is now almost junk? I'm sure that's not what President Trump wants to say, but it's
That's
kind of
not
shows a lack of self-awareness at best. The fact they called their bill the Triple B bill.
well. If listen, Trump knows about junk bonds because he issued a lot of them back in the day. But I guarantee he had no idea it was
Maybe
equated.
some subliminal kind of, connection in his brain said, yeah, Triple B, good idea. I know that
But,
name.
but Besant isn't a Besant's really smart. If there's anybody who understands global flows, it's him. he must be making some calculus here, that we're going to get. He must really believe we're going to get prolonged 3% growth at some point, and as soon as we get through this sort of period of time now, that's when the budget will start taking care of itself with 3% growth. By the way, if you get prolonged 3% growth, you can pay down debt. I mean, that's when it starts paying down.
Well,
Um,
I mean, listen, Bob knows this because we first met in Japan many years ago. And Scott Bessent's a great fan of Abe, and Abe, the former Prime Minister of Japan. Abe had this three arrows principle. And basically, Scott Bessent's borrowed that and said we're going to have 3% growth, 3% deficit. And what was the one? 3%, 3 trillion or 3 billion increase in energy. And so the idea is that you have energy prices falling dramatically, which will bring down inflation. You'll have growth that's going to be unleashed by deregulation and AI now. People think and hope that will also deliver more growth. And taken together, that will enable us to grow out of the huge debt burden. Um,
why is
on
that
top of
absurd?
that, on top of that, he's also doing things like he's talking about buybacks of bonds to keep the market calm. He's trying to, change the duration, do short-term issuance in a very opportunistic way. And he's also doing two other crucial measures that could boost demand. One is he's changing the regulation around banks, the so-called SLRs, which will make it a lot easier for banks to load up on treasuries too. And they'll be really encouraged, i.e., compelled to do that, I'm sure, in the future. And he's also backing stablecoin issuance is going to be backed by treasuries, which could create several trillion dollars worth of demand for treasuries as well. So you put that together, and I think that's his game, that he's trying to basically keep the bond
What?
markets calm.
But why isn't that? That seems to be a smart move. I mean, I'm trying to. I mean, listen again, and I don't know if it matters if Powell gets bounced immediately or not. If you do provide strong evidence, you're getting 3% growth. That kind of makes the numbers work, and bond and the markets will be kind of happy if you get 3% growth, and you essentially keep the line straight on spending, which is what they're trying to do here.
Gillian, one thing that you can add to that list is the risk transfer trades. So anything that opens up bank balance sheets right now, and I think that is exactly what the administration is doing. It's giving banks the room, the capital relief, and also the balance sheet room, so that if they need to be a backstop and actually be a primary dealer in its truest form, that they have the gun, they have the dry powder to do so. And that's, I would say a non-headline but really important news story for this administration. They're
Absolutely.
trying, yeah, it's like that's at the core of what's happening.
Absolutely. It's one of the reasons why, going back to the Fed, Um, in essence, what I think's happened in the last 6 months is the Fed has more or less surrendered control over financial regulation. There's been a series of executive orders from the White House around this. The Fed has not fought it. It's not created any legal challenge because the Fed is trying to circle the wagons around monetary policy. And I think it knows that it can't, or the governors know they can't defend both at the same time. So they're choosing monetary policy above all else to defend. And insofar as the Treasury is now essentially running financial regulation, they're trying to put these two things together. To me, though, the really big question is financial repression and whether that's where we're heading. Because I won't go through and give you a sort of a long spiel about economic history, but the way that the US and UK got out of their post-World War II debt burdens was not through just higher growth or austerity. It was financial repression, i.e., creating a situation where financial institutions are forced to buy government bonds at slightly negative rates. And if you maintain that for many years, the power of compounding cuts debt. And Besant has never come out and said that's what he's trying to do, but all the signs are that they're sliding towards that. So, to my mind, the big question every investor should be asking right now is in a world of open capital accounts where money can flow across borders on the internet, is it possible to do financial repression? Is that what they're trying? And what does that mean for you as a holder potentially of bonds?
Although, where are you going to put your money in China? I mean, I guess you can. Bitcoin,
You could,
Germany. I just the world. When you really start breaking it down, we may be turning into midgets, but we're still the tallest midget in the room. in many
Oh,
ways.
Charlie, but you bring up a good point, which is if you look at one of the market caps of the Mag 7, that one stock is equal to like the economies of a lot
Right.
of European countries,
Yeah.
ex Germany.
Yeah. I mean,
So this is what we were saying before, like the liquidity is here and the depth of the markets are here. So that's why you see this every time the rates on the long, the long end go to 10%, they bounce because there's just money there. If that money goes somewhere else, then there's a lot of trouble.
And you do get the impression that that's the approach of the Trump administration, is that we have been told for so long in the U.S. that we're not as big as we used to be. We should not. Our economy is not as great as it once was. We're up against this incredible force in China, and they're saying, well, wait a second. First off, you don't know what's over there. They don't even do accounting. By the way, Europe can't defend itself. It really needs us to defend it. And you start adding it up, and we look really good. And I think that's what Trump and Besson is saying, whether it's on trade and in terms of the Fed. I'll tell you, I'm all for Fed independence, but I start finding it really difficult defending Powell. I mean, he kind of missed. He kind of, what they call it, screwed the pooch back in the day. He missed inflation. He kind of didn't he cut rates last year, and the 10 years started gapping out. He didn't need to cut rates around the time of the election. I just find him to be such an uninspiring guy to like rally behind on Fed independence, because he's been so
Well,
so.
let's segue to China.
Oh,
You
can I
talked
quickly
about
ask though,
China.
Charlie, do you want a showman to be head of the central bank?
Yeah.
Washington's full of showmen right now, or do you want a boring bureaucrat? I mean, central banks work best when they are extremely boring.
But I
Um,
want a competent, boring bureaucrat, and the case that he's competent is hard to make, and I'm just telling you again. I feel
I
uncomfortable saying this, but when you miss transitory inflation, when you literally parrot the line of Janet Yellen, the biggest BS artist that represents Joe Biden's $9 trillion spending blowout, you parrot her. In my view, you lose. In my view, you're not qualified to be Fed chair. Now, this might be the worst example to fire him over, but he does not deserve to have that job after missing transitory inflation and joining forces with Janet Yellen and Joe Biden in trying to convince the country that if you fiscally spend 9 trillion and you go into wicked amounts of debt, like 120% of GDP, when we're not in COVID, by the way, that's okay, and it's just a supply chain bottleneck. Well, man, that's in my view, that's the economic equivalent of not finding weapons of mass destruction when George Bush started the Iraq War. It's literally.
Okay, Charlie, we're going to have to agree to disagree on this, okay? Because I've been hypercritical of the Fed in recent years, primarily because I think QE was ridiculous after the first round, and I've
Right.
argued with people a lot about that. So I'm no fan of Fed policies. However, when it came to what happened during COVID, every single Western central bank basically found itself in the same position.
We're talking
So
about after COVID, not during COVID.
well,
About
after
when we
COVID,
did that.
after COVID as well. I mean,
No, no,
name me one central bank which has not had that trajectory.
listen, they all screwed up, is what you're saying.
Okay, so you want to file along
No,
with them.
my point is this: when Joe Biden and Janet Yellen were spending trillions, okay, I'm not talking about what went on in Brussels, with the EU, when Joe Biden and Janet Yellen was spending $9 trillion on stimulus that was not needed because the economy was opening. It was clearly opening. And then he gave them cover, calling it transitory inflation, like they were saying. And every CEO on Wall Street, I remember James Gorman, who's hardly a right winger, the head of Morgan Stanley at the time. We had dinner in the summer of 2001. He said, these guys are out of their minds, transitory. I mean, if they knew it,
They all panicked and they did the wrong thing. However,
he was a flat for
inflation
Biden.
then came down very rapidly.
The rate of inflation came down rapidly. Prices remained elevated, and that's why neither Joe Biden nor Kamala Harris is president right now. I mean, you could make most Americans, when they were polled on this, said, I can't afford this shit. Well, look, inflation's down, the rate's down, but the prices are still high. We never had a disinflationary cycle, and
Well, the way to, okay, again, I'd say that much of this, so Trump comes in and basically starts unleashing even more debt on top of
Yeah.
all this and takes actions which could potentially push
not,
prices
not
up again through
unleashing more,
tariffs.
not
You
more,
know,
not more. He kept the line straight. The
well, you
spending.
got 3 to 4 trillion of extra debt as a result of the big beautiful bill.
Well, we now, and guess
And
what?
I, again, I'm no fan.
That's
I'm
on
no
the
fan of
trajectory.
the.
That's on the trajectory that's lower than they were going to spend otherwise. I'm not defending it either. I'm just saying that it's
Listen, they are all equally appalling right now in terms of their long-term
no,
policy
nobody was more.
trajectories.
Wait a second.
I'm
Nobody
sorry,
spent
but
more. Nobody
I,
spent more than Joe Biden looking to outdo
yeah,
Obama.
and no one's cutting taxes more than Donald Trump right now.
That
So,
might be a good. Maybe that's
I
So,
why
mean,
we're getting. That's why we got
well,
3%.
we're going to have to agree to disagree on this one because I say I would throw stones at the Biden administration all day. I'd throw stones at the central bank's administration all day, but I also think I'd also throw stones at the Trump administration right now.
We have three
let's
percent
talk about
growth and almost
alternatives,
no inflation.
Charlie.
Okay, can
Charlie.
I quickly say one thing? Essentially, what's happening right now is investors are betting on taco, that Trump always chickens out on trade.
Well, he
The
is.
administration is betting on Tina, which is there is no alternative. And they assume that everyone is going to keep buying treasury bonds because there is no alternative. The reality is that even if you hate the rest of the world, there is another alternative inside the US called equities, called private equity, private capital. So it doesn't have to be bonds at all. You can stay patriotic and stay in dollar assets and say, I hate the debt profile of the US. And that's quite rational.
It's still the best safe haven in the world, and we're not looking to invade Taiwan. I'm
Thus
just.
far. But I mean, just look at some of the flash crashes we've had recently.
I mean,
So,
which we had a flashback like when
Well,
when
think about
Trump.
2020,
Well,
2020.
April is certainly we
Yeah, I mean,
battled.
and when Trump threatened to like unleash tariffs like mad, and he's backed off. Listen, I'm no fan of this tariff thing. I don't want people to think that all of a sudden I've turned dovish on tariffs because I hate it. But I just think that you got to give credit where credit's due, and and I think the situation. I'd rather be us now than China now from an economic
Yeah,
standpoint.
yeah. Before we go to China, quickly, I'll say one thing. I will give credit where credit's due, and I will say that Secretary Bessent, who was given a pretty damn difficult hand 6 months ago, has worked an astonishing set of outcomes thus far in terms of keeping the bond market calm. And his biggest achievement is actually what is the very fact that no one's talking about the bond market so much right now because there hasn't been a big bond crisis.
Gillian, a couple of questions for you. So, a friend of mine said to me, this is just a very different arena I'm going to go to. A friend of mine said to me, he said, what's the word that China hates? And the word that China hates is cousins. And then, yeah, it's interesting. Cousins, like, seriously, because of of how they've managed their demographics. And in Europe, the word they hate is air conditioning.
Not anymore.
Not anymore.
Everyone's frying in London and Rome and everything else right now in Paris. So actually,
Right.
yeah.
So in the U.S., what do you think the word, you're an anthropologist. I've read all your stuff. It's great. What do you
Sacrifice.
think the word that we like the most? Sacrifice. Yeah.
I'd say sacrifice,
Yeah.
and it's one of the biggest
That's what gets
cultural
to,
shifts in the last 60, 70 years because, basically post World War II, there was a mood of national sacrifice. What I find fascinating about the Trump administration, no one's talked much about sacrifice and shared pain and everything else recently. What I find fascinating
yep.
is that, the Trump administration actually has talked a bit about sacrifice. Remember all that discussion about dolls, how families could only have 2 dolls at Christmas instead of, 13 dolls or whatever. And Trump was trying to say to people, just suck it up, you'll do fine, or rather JD Vance was, and there was outrage. And to me, the big question between China and the US as they try and work out the trade, um, deal or lack of it going forward, is which country has the capacity to absorb more pain and which has the capacity to accept more sacrifice.
Well,
And I
which
wouldn't bet on America in that context.
Well,
although
your
although
book,
although the
but
cultural
your
level,
book, hold on, Charlie, hold on a second. Hold on a second. So your book, Saving the Sun, sets a template for what China is going through. right? The two biggest holders of U.S. debt are Japan, China. They are.
Actually, I'm
And
not sure
maybe
they are.
Taiwan.
Not anymore. I think China's actually sunk. I think Canada may be up there. The UK is definitely up there, and the hedge fund havens, Luxembourg and Cayman Islands, are also up there. There's been quite a shift in the last few years in terms. China used to be the biggest holder, but not anymore.
I think it's
But
Japan,
if
right?
you
You say
include
Japan?
Japan is the
Taiwan,
biggest one, yeah.
Yeah.
Japan's the biggest one. But if you include Taiwan, let's put it this way: the Pac Rim is a huge holder of our debt for sure.
Yeah.
And you wrote this fantastic book about what happens when the capital allocation policies are so successful, they don't know how to actually change to handle the success. So you've been getting some calls from Hong Kong and other places saying, please talk about this book. Can you just
Yeah.
expand upon that?
Well, it's kind of weird because I wrote this book 20 years ago, and it did very well in Asia and became quite well known as a book called Saving the Sun. It was about the rise and fall of Japan, told through the lens of one particular Japanese bank that was bought by a team of Wall Street private equity players called Shinsei. And at the time, there wasn't that much interest in America or Europe because people were going, Japan's kind of weird. They've had a banking crisis. Who cares? That's a weird little Japanese thing. We can ignore it. And actually, in the last couple of years, there's been a lot of interest in the book, partly because, of course, in 2008, we discovered that the kind of banking crisis Japan had had actually wasn't a Japan only affair. It hit America too, and there were big parallels between what happened. But also because now the questions that we're asking is China going to follow the path of Japan and its cousin, if you like, and look rather similar? And the reality is there are lots of reasons to see parallels. Japan and China as well created a financial system that was designed to fuel rapid industrial growth, basically in Japan's case, post World War II devastation. And they channeled all the money in the country through the banks to favored industries, and they grew really fast, and it worked really well for a few years until, like a child outgrowing a pair of shoes, essentially the financial system got out of sync where companies were because companies were so successful. They didn't need bank financing anymore. So loads of money built up inside the country, which had nowhere to go. They sort of half opened the capital markets to the outside world, but in a rather clumsy way. So you had massive distortions. And that in many ways is what China's living with right now. It's got a industrial sector which has been wildly successful in some ways, but full of overcapacity. It's got a lot of good money going after bad to try and keep people in jobs. And it's never actually matured its capital markets to ensure that you can have really a self-regulating equilibrium or sensible use of capital in a way that's going to drive the economy for the long term.
How does
So
the how does the lack of opacity, is that the right word? Opacity?
the lack of
Opacity.
transparency, the
I think
Lack
opacity.
of time.
the opacity impact the uh, the view of the Chinese economies from investors. I mean, one of the interesting things about the financial crisis is that one of the reasons why people started, you name it, the big shorts, all of them, throw in Stan Druckenmiller and Phil Falcone and everybody else that made negative bets against subprime and banks. One of the reasons why they did that is because they knew the balance sheets, and they also knew that there was mark-to-market accounting coming on them, and the balance sheets were all underwater. We really don't know the balance sheets of what's going on in China. Now, does that matter, or is it just is that being that opaque? Does it hurt them because people could freak out even more and just at some point say, "I want nothing to do with this economy"?
Well, you can look again the history of Japan and see that, until really the late 1990s, the Japanese banks' balance sheets were also totally opaque. In my book, Saving the Sun, I talk about the fact that at one stage the bank I wrote about was stuffing files into concrete manholes to kind of cover up the bad loans, quite literally and physically. And the reality was that none of the investors actually believed in the balance sheet of Japanese banks. They knew they were basically fictional, but they believed that the government would always stand behind the banks and the so-called keiretsu, corporate families, would always prop the banks up. So the pillar of faith was basically the faith in the government rescuing them. And what happened in 1998 was that suddenly a couple of banks went bust. People lost faith in the government to always stand behind the bank. So that pillar of faith cracked. But there wasn't the second pillar of faith, of which was basically market scrutiny. And capital markets work by essentially having a caveat emptor principle, but believing in the balance sheets and the accounting principles. And if you like, market discipline, people can oversee what's happening. And that's a pillar of faith that guarantees things keep working. So Japan was in the worst of both worlds, where it neither had government nor market faith. And so it had no faith. And credit markets without credit, in the Latin sense, meaning trust, don't work. So the markets froze up. Something quite similar happened in 2008, but I won't talk about that right now because the pillar of faith had been the credit rating agencies. That cracked. And for a while, there was no other pillar of faith to prop the system up. Um, but with China right now, it's in danger of entering a similar limbo land where essentially there isn't enough government transparency for people to trust in market accounts. But the government thus far has propped them up, sort of, but not entirely. And we have had some banks and financial institutions go bust. The difference, of course, is that China has oodles of money to support the banks if it wants. It has, at the moment, enough control to be able to do things gradually and amortize the pain to some degree. And thus far, it's managed to escape what Japan had, which was deflation. And bad loans become dramatically worse in deflation, not inflation. But China is definitely hovering on the edge and it could follow Japan's path. The one big difference, though, is that after my book was published, Saving the Sun, I first of all discovered it had been actually translated into Chinese, but a pirated copy, and it became a bestseller in China. I never saw a penny because someone had, basically stolen the IP. Surprise, surprise. But secondly, I had streams of Chinese officials that came to see me to talk about the book. And there are lots of people in the middle ranks of China who understand the dangers really clearly and who are hyper smart. And if they were in charge, could certainly navigate a way out. The question, though, as always, is politics. Will they be in charge?
And you kind of hit it on the head. Someone stole your IP. I mean,
Well,
By the way,
except my second and
by the,
third and
by the way,
fourth books, they actually did then pay me. So, in
by the
fact,
way,
China has grown up.
by the way, I had a very similar experience. I published a book called Don't Blame the Shorts in 2010, which Financial Times was very generous in their review. Someone sent me a copy in Chinese, it had the same thing in it. So it's on my living room sofa.
and you had nothing to do
In
with it.
there,
Your publisher,
that's what I got out of it. I got a copy of it in Chinese. So,
but your publisher didn't. Let's just be clear here. Your publisher didn't arrange that.
no, not at
Oh,
all. It just happened. So, it's a good.
So, Bob, you and
This
I
is
can do a kind of pirated Chinese copy party then.
I
However,
mean,
I will
perfect.
stress that, by the way, the last three books I've got, each time I've got a bigger and bigger actual advance and a contract in Chinese. So things are
Interesting.
changing.
yeah. I
Yeah.
mean,
So like the Belts and Roads Initiative um, versus tariffs. If you're a country dealing with the United States and you're dealing with China, and let's say you're somewhere in Africa, or you're somewhere in South America, somewhere in Central America, you're somewhere in the, let's call it Central Asia. What do you think you're feeling? So you have this tariff policy where we're saying, hey, you have to pay your fair share, and this is how we're going to go about it. And you have this Belts and Roads Initiative, which is, hey, we'll build infrastructure, but on very, it's almost like private credit like terms, and very, very, very draconian. Plus, to your point and my point, the information leakage that happens when you strike these deals, because your power plant, your ports, your data centers are all subject IP hacking, very different tact with the rest of the world, as China is trying to say, hey, we're this soft, cuddly, we have credit too, and take us up on it. How do you think that plays out?
I think it's basically carrot versus stick. Right now, in post-World War II, America spent several decades trying to use carrots to pull other countries into its orbit by essentially opening up its markets, providing support, development, etc., etc. Today, Trump administration has resorted to sticks and almost exclusively sticks, big time. China is copying what America did post-World War II and using carrots. And guess what? Most other countries prefer carrots to sticks, and so it should be no surprise that China's been winning a lot of friends that way.
Yeah, but do people really want to do business with with the slave labor government that's looking to, clean your clock militarily and economically? I mean, China does have is sort of, driven on a single purpose. And, listen, I agree with you that one of the sort of huge problems with the whole tariff arrangement was that we went to war with everybody. We should have went to war with China, obviously, and focused on them and built relationships with everybody else. That doesn't mean we have to, just roll over on the EU so they don't spend their fair share on defense. But there was a way of doing it that they didn't do it. But be that as it may, you kind of play with fire with China, where you don't know the accounting, you don't really know the financial system. It's very opaque. You just don't know where you're putting your money.
But if you are an African country right now in need of a port, in need of something practical, you're not going to sit there and worry about the accounting in China right now. You want a port, or you want some assistance and help. Same
That's
in
an
Latin
African
America
country, but that's an
or
African
Latin
country.
America, in Latin America,
That's a little different. Is
and right
Brazil
now you're
really?
looking at, I mean, the US government is so unreliable and unpredictable in the eyes of the rest of the world that at least China, you kind of got some sense of what it's trying to do, where it's going. I mean,
Communist
Trump on,
dictatorship.
off, on, off, on, off,
Oh, come on. You're comparing the Trump administration, as bad as it is, to the Chinese communist government that enslaves people, does ethnic cleansing. I mean, it does some of the worst things in the world. Steals your IP, obviously but you can't trust them when you're trading with them. I mean, this is a sort of a mercantilistic, militaristic economy. Again, I don't know about Trump. I mean, he's
Well,
trade
mercantilistic and militaristic is exactly what the rest of the world thinks the Trump administration is right now.
more than China.
I'm not saying I'm not doing a contest here. I'm simply
No, but it
saying
is a
that if you
contest.
go back 10 years ago, America could say that it was not primarily mercantilistic and militaristic. Right now, it looks like it is. So
Right, because we
ironically,
had to
America thought
be
that
to a certain extent,
America thought that China would become more like it 20 years ago. In
and it
fact,
did.
America today is becoming more like China.
Wait a second. We opened up. We let China get away with murder, evade all the sort of rules of the WTO, of all these trade agreements. Excuse me if I'm misspeaking here. We let them get away with it, and all they did was screw the rest of the world and us, and that is a verifiable fact. So the fact that the Trump administration wants to come in and straighten things out, I don't know why the world would think we're somehow the bad guys in all this. And
Well,
if
okay, but
their
let me take
face,
it from the point of view of Brazil right now, okay? Because as far as Brazil's concerned, they're not sitting there saying, well, China can't be trusted and America can be trusted. They've just been told they're going to have massive tariffs, not because of their own trade deficit, because Trump doesn't like what's happened with Bolsonaro in the
right,
in the law courts. They
right.
don't know whether they can sell soybeans into America or not. And at the same time, they have China that is pretty damn consistent and providing assistance and saying, yes, we'd love to take your soybeans, and no, we're not going to change the tariff rate every 5 minutes. So you're comparing apples and oranges here in
But they,
terms of
but they,
what
but they did,
people who are sitting there as trading partners,
but they said that to the rest of the world as they were fucking them for years. Excuse my French.
who the Chinese,
Yeah, I mean,
yeah,
what
and
are they?
they keep buying soybeans in a
And they keep
reliable
fucking,
way.
and they keep fucking their trading partners.
So
That's all they've been
how are
doing.
they fucking Brazil right
Are
now?
you? Well, I don't know
I
how
mean,
they're fucking Brazil.
I'm not
How do
talking
they
about
fuck
tech.
us for years? How do they fuck the rest of the world when we let them in the WTO? We let them in, and then they violated every clause in terms of dumping products, of every sort of trade rule that could be created that we had that they agreed to. They violated. So why would you trust them?
And
And
why
it's
would
like
you trust
trusting.
America right now, which is basically emulating
You're
the same tactics?
no, no. So you're saying the
I'm
U.S.
not saying either. I'm saying
You're
China's
equating the
behavior
U.S.
was
to the
appalling.
communist
However,
Chinese.
I'm
Come
sorry,
on.
China's behavior has been appalling, but right now the Trump administration's behavior is pretty appalling as far as other
No,
countries are concerned.
everybody's appalling to a certain extent, but are you really giving the moral equivalence between the U.S. and China?
As far as most other countries are concerned in dealing with them as trading partners, yes. Because guess what?
So the
At least the
Chinese,
Chinese are predictable. The Americans right now are not.
so that they're predictable in knowing that they're going to fuck you, is what you're saying.
Well, the Trump administration says up front, one day we're going to fuck you, then we're not. Then we
No,
are, then we're not.
The Trump administration said, here are tariffs. This is what we want from you to trade with us. They did not agree to a trade deal and violate every rule of it. That's a huge different things. They don't employ, the Trump administration doesn't employ slave labor. It's not a closed economy. I mean, I see this is where I get cross with a lot of people on the progressive left. You guys literally equate Trump to the worst thing in the world.
First of all, I'm not on the progressive left myself. I'm more centrist.
Okay.
But secondly, and by the way, I'm an American and European and British as well. So, and
I
secondly,
didn't say you weren't. I'm
it's
just
kind of
saying I just called you
yeah. No,
progressive left.
no, I've often been told because of my accent, I must be a sort of European socialist or whatever. But secondly, I would say that both are going down wrong paths and have gone down wrong paths in recent years.
I'm listen. Again, I find myself like kicking myself trying to defend the Trump trade policy. The moral equivalence to how dealing with China and dealing with the United States is apples and oranges. And with all due respect, I don't think you should go there.
I'm not saying they're equivalent, but what I'm
So we got
saying
2
is
minutes.
America should not be throwing stones in a glass house right now.
Oh, come on. America throwing
So-
stones at China?
Throwing stones across the rest of the world. Anyway, sorry, Bob, you're trying to act as
rest of the
United
world.
Nations. We still have United Nations on the podcast, and you are officially at Bob. So there you go. You
We're
can
trying to
broker
get
a
rid of
peace.
them out of New York City as well. Please.
I know, exactly. But Bob is still here, thank heaven. So go over to you, Bob. Sorry.
Yeah,
Remember, the
so
United
let's
Nations also
just-
wants to get rid of Israel. So
And by the way,
Charlie,
I'm certainly not
Charlie.
saying that I in any way, shape, or form support what China's doing or has done. However, I don't support what Trump's doing either. But yeah, sorry, Bob.
So let's think about something else. Let's move on from the battleground that we just left. So here's the last question. We have about 2 minutes. Dubai as the world's financial center. Your thoughts?
Hard to believe it's going to become the world's financial center right now, but right now
Or a financial center.
it's a really interesting crossroads. And whether it's the fact that they are sitting on a lot of money and they are trying to build infrastructure at a stunning pace and doing so very effectively and efficiently in a way that I hate to say it, Charlie, puts America to shame in terms of the infrastructure spend and actual effective deployment, whether it's the fact that they are basically acting as a kind of financial United Nations and embracing everybody and trying to be a bridge across the place. Whether it's a fact that, in fact, the Middle East is going to be sucking in capital in the future years, not just exporting it, because they do have these ambitious infrastructure plans. It's a very, very, interesting place that's booming fast. And the other interesting thing about Dubai is they're trying to avoid zero-sum game mentality, which frankly is one of the biggest problems both in China and America right now. So yes, they are massive petrodollar states and they are dependent on oil and gas, but they're also doubling down big time on renewable energies, solar panels, everything else, because they don't see it as being either or. They don't see it as a zero-sum game. And the tragedy in America right now is it's being presented like that.
And that's where we'll end it. Gillian, thank you so much for your time.
Charlie, I expected you to come back and tell me I'm wrong.
Well, I wanted to say ESG didn't work out too well.
Yeah, but the climate is still heating up. So guess what? There are other ways of doing it. Environmental protection is the issue, baby. Remember, it was actually
it's been heating
Nixon
up for a long time. And it cooled off.
Nixon introduced it. Republicans used to back the EPA, but anyway, and they created it.
Nixon did a lot of things. Do we really want to go there?
No, but I thought he'd appeal more to you than I thought Nixon would appeal more to you, Charlie, than Greta Thunberg.
I'm a Ronald Reagan guy. Sorry.
Well, there you go.
Thanks for being a great sparring partner, by the way.
Well, listen, thanks for having me on, guys, and always great to chat with you both. I both admire and respect you both for what you're doing.
Yeah, we're trying to hash it out, as they say. Until the next time, Gillian. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Wow. Are you tired, Bob?
I got to tell you, I think you're sweating. You got your wind sprints and your workout in today. It's amazing.
Yeah, that was fun. I mean, listen, it takes two sides to make a market, right? So we present both sides. You were a good moderator. Let the viewer decide. But damn, Ronald Reagan was so much better than Nixon. Come on. Anyway, thanks for tuning in. Another riveting edition of Risk and Return. I'm Charlie Gasparino with the granddaddy of data, Bob Sloan, signing off.